Welcome on. We begin now. This side event is hosted by Soteria International. We work usually with questions relating to when the human rights are abused due to individuals' practice, spiritual practice or religion. Now we want to raise this question within the refugee and asylum question due to this unique situation that Europe is facing today. The Mircea case and the situation of Gregorian Bivolaru is quite well known, and it has been raised several times here and in other instances. And just very short, he's a religious spiritual leader from Romania, persecuted since the Cartarescu times, who received asylum in Sweden. It was a decision in the Supreme Court of Sweden in 2005, and in 2007 he received a refugee status according to the Geneva Convention. And Romania has several times asked to have him extradited, that the Swedish authorities has continued to reject. But this summer, the Romanian authorities, so the Romanian police, issued an European warrant of arrest. And this makes the situation very delicate for Sweden, because according to the collaboration between police and prosecutors in European Union, the Swedish international prosecutor cannot really deny to follow this warrant of arrest. On the other hand, Sweden is at the same time and still have not challenged the asylum and his refugee status according to the Geneva Convention. So this points to the very question if the human rights and the refugee rights will stay stronger than the political directives given within the European Union from a political vision that maybe doesn't fit with the reality that people are living. Our side event will be a lot of voices regarding this. We will have several people speaking to us through video interviews. They will be short, about 3 minutes, the longest of them, in order to have as many views as possible on this issue. I'll present the program and the speakers shortly. My name is Konrad Svenninger. I'm a Swedish citizen. I work for Soteria International that is based in Copenhagen and Brussels. And we have followed this case since we were founded in 2007. Our first speaker will be Joachim Porslund, who is a journalist and who recently directed a documentary film about the Bivolaru case, the Mircea case, specifically from a Danish angle, but it's very valid for us here, what he found. We will also have in the beginning an intervention of Gregory, who is a human rights lawyer who represents Bivolaru in the Strasbourg Court of Human Rights. And here is also working for the Council of Europe and is a lecturer of law at University of Strasbourg. Willy Fautré, the well-known human rights fighter within spiritual and religious questions, will be with us on a video interview that we made here last week. He has recently finished a report on this case that was published in May, I believe, this year. We have also Professor Gabriel Andreescu, who is professor teaching human rights, minority rights and freedom of religion in Bucharest. He's also a writer, dissident, and founder of the Romanian Helsinki Committee, Apador CH. We will have also a short comment from Mircea Cartarescu, the very famous Romanian writer, on the media's role in witch-hunting intellectuals in Romania. We will have an intervention from Professor of European Law at the University of Bologna, Lucia Rossi, and we will have comments from Mihai Stoian, who is representing Mr. Bivolaru here in this forum. So we will begin to hear very shortly from Mr. Tuan, from the human rights perspective, how he sees the specific case, and very short, it's 3 minutes, an introduction to the case from a legal perspective.
In 2004, if you recall, there was a massive police raid with 300 members of the police force into the homes of yoga communities, massive, with the consequences of massive arrestations. massive detentions, massive wide defamation and libeling campaign, with, as a consequences, quite clear and manifest breach of his rights to presumption of innocence. And Mr. Bivolaru took then the decision to flee the country and to seek international attention abroad. He flee to Sweden, a country that granted him in 2005 political asylum for unfair trial in case he would be expelled or returned to Romania, media harassment, violation of presumption of innocence, and unfair trial because of fabricated evidence. And I am referring to the statements, the witness statements of one of the alleged victims, in this case, Mrs. Dumitru Magdalena. To make it short, in 2010 he was acquitted by the Tribunal of Sibiu as to the offense, the main offense of sexual intercourse with a minor. The 14th of March 2011, the Court of Appeal of Alba Iulia confirmed the decision of the first instance and rejected the appeal introduced by the General Prosecutor of Romania. However, in April 2012, the High Court of Cassation of Justice, the Supreme Court of Romania, quashed entirely the decision of appeal and accepted the extraordinary appeal of the General Prosecution. The case is actually pending partially before the High Court of Justice. He was recently convicted for sexual intercourse. However, this case is now pending before the European Court of Human Rights based in Strasbourg. I just would like to stress one more fact at the domestic level. This is the fact that in 2011, the Tribunal of First Instance of Bucharest for the first time recognized the illegal and political persecution of Mr. Bivolaru as a political opponent. In this very important and final judgment of 2011, the Tribunal of Bucharest recognized that earlier convictions of Mr. Bivolaru were all fabricated. And I think this is a very important element here. This is the fact that even in Romania, his political history and persecution is recognized. But still, the persecution is going on with a pending case, which is referred now to Strasbourg.
Very shortly, he here explains the facts behind the asylum, the many reasons for Sweden to give asylum, and also in the end, this perspective on that it's recognized not only by Sweden and other countries and researchers, but also by Romania themselves, that he was persecuted by political reasons during the Ceausescu times. And we'll move to Joachim Porslund, who is a Danish journalist who was caught by this story and made recently during the spring, it was published this documentary about the case. And Joachim, if you explain shortly your journey through this, making this documentary, that's also how we met. You met a lot of experts within human rights, journalist colleagues, and politicians. So please briefly tell us of your findings, and then I think we'll see a clip from your movie also.
Yes. So first of all, I want to say that Mr. Bivolaru, as it was mentioned here, he was in 2011, all the accusations against him and persecutions during communist time was acknowledged as fabrications from the Securitate. And this was kind of what really triggered my interest in the research about this yoga movement, and especially about Bivolaru's case, I mean, it's very interesting how since the communist time he has been doing the same activities, meaning he has been a yoga teacher, a teacher of yoga, meditation, and natural health care, and he has, let's say, yoga at that point when he started teaching was very controversial in 1972, and in 1981 it was actually illegal to practice yoga and different forms of spiritual practice, even martial arts in the communist Romania. And he went to prison in the 80s. He, in 1989, he was put in a psychiatric hospital. And after the revolution, then he actually was able to go public with his yoga teaching and was part of founding the movement Mircea, which if you were in the side event some days ago, you know, also is having the same issues as Bivolaru with the Romanian authorities and the Romanian media. So from this point of view, I went into research of both the movement from inside, let's say, the yoga community, and also the different experts and external supervisors of this movement, human rights organizations, but also different journalists and experts within sectarian structures and so on. And what is very interesting is that all these experts, all these supervisors of Mircea and of Bivolaru's case, all agree on the fact that this movement is not, as the media is saying, an anti-social movement. On the other hand, it's a beneficial social environment, and there's absolutely none of these aspects which is mentioned in the Romanian media, where we have more than 500 media reportages about Mircea and about Bivolaru since 2004, which all have an extremely, let's say, demonizing way of presenting Bivolaru and the movement. And we will see a clip a little later today where you can see what kind of, let's say, pressure the media has put on Bivolaru. So among these experts, we will see now a clip from the movie. We have in this clip the reporter from the EU Observer, Lisbeth Kirk. We have Jens Peter Bonde, a Danish European parliamentarian, former EU parliamentarian. We have Ulla Sandbeck, also a priest and European parliamentarian. Now she's retired. And we have also other people which we don't have time now to show the interview with, but there's a whole report from the sex investigator Carl-Erik Nylund, who was by the Supreme Court of Sweden to make a report on Mircea and Bivolaru, and who dismissed any of these persecutions from the Romanian authorities. And we have also a clip from Willy Fautré. And a part of my research, I also was very inspired by Gabriel Andreescu's work, which is here today, and especially his two-volume book on Mircea, which is, you have in the back there a translation, Mircea, radiography of repression. It's just excerpts. And there's at certain point he says in the movie that the media is turning black into white and white into black, and this is also the title of my movie, how first of all the media, cooperative media in Romania and other places often have a tendency to see the things very black and white, and in this case they have even turned the whole thing upside down, so whatever can be considered as something beneficial and good for the society is presented as something demonized. And on the other hand, these tendencies which are let's say maybe not of a very beneficial nature is often presented as something legalized through the media. So let's now see this short clip with first a Danish yoga practitioner who experienced the raid on the yoga community in Bucharest in 2004, in the 18th of March 2004, where everything kind of climaxed this persecutions against the movement.
Jeg valgte at starte med at rejse tilbage i tiden og få et indblik i, hvad der skete med yogaskolen i Rumænien. En af mine veninder var til stede i Bucharest, da forfølgelsen kulminerede i marts 2004. 300 af det rumænske politis antiterrorkorps stormer 16 private bofællesskaber.
The police have broken into our house like terrorists, wearing machine guns and everything, without legitimation, without showing any ID, without anything.
Det var tidligere om morgenen, og os, der boede i Asylum, vi sov. Og så blev huset stormet af bevæbnede, maskerede mænd, som kom springende ind fra badeværelsesvinduet på første sal og brød ind i huset, alle de veje, de nu kunne, med maskingeværer og råbte og skreg på romansk. Jeg havde ingen anelse om, hvad der foregik. Overhovedet ingen anelse om, hvad der foregik. Og fra mit billede fra medier og så videre, så tænkte jeg jo bare, at det var terrorister, at det var guerillastyrker, jeg ved ikke hvad. Når vi kørte med vores kollegaer i metroen for at tage til vores yogakursus, så turde vi ikke tale om, at vi praktiserede yoga, fordi alle folk omkring, det var tydeligt, at der var sådan at yoga bare var noget forfærdeligt noget. Så det var en meget underlig oplevelse.
Nyheden eksploderer i de rumænske medier, men vækker samtidig en stærk international kritik fra blandt andre Amnesty International, Helsingforskomiteen og en række danske europaparlamentarikere i forbindelse med Griegs sag om politisk asyl i Sverige imod den rumænske stat.
When I first heard about the case against Mr. Bivolaru, I investigated a little and I wrote to good friends in the Swedish government and the Swedish parliament, and they investigated the accusations from the Romanian authorities. They found nothing. They didn't find any crimes Mr. Bivolaru had committed, so they released him.
Particularly in the European Parliament, politicians are very concerned with this, that people are actually granted political asylum in Sweden because of the unjust and unfair court system in Romania.
It never stops to amaze me that this case has not been dropped years ago. I mean, I took it to the European Parliament. The Foreign Affairs Committee's chairman was involved in it. He put a number of questions and came up with the answer that the only mistake which was made by the Minister of Justice, who had not given the Swedish authorities the right information. After that, I do not have any confidence whatsoever in the Romanian authorities.
So Ulla Sandback, who you saw here in the end, she was actually the person who recommended Bivolaru to seek asylum in Sweden. She had followed him, his movement, his teachings for some time. When she saw these violent attacks on his movement, he said, you have to escape, you have to flee, you will not have justice here. Try to find justice in Sweden, which he did. Also, Joachim, I know that the images that are shown here from the raids, they're actually shot by the police themselves. And they were broadcasted the same day in Romanian media, in showing the attacks, the brutality of them, and also people in very humiliating situations. One of the main characters, Madalina Dumitru, who you heard about and you will see a little of her later, was filmed half naked, only in her underwear, and this is a girl of 17 at that time, and it was broadcasted all over. So actually the brutality and the abuses that Romanian state after accused the movement of was something that they did themselves in these hours. Also, I know, Joachim, that another colleague of yours, Vibeke Sperling, who is a well-renowned human rights writer and journalist in Denmark, she also engaged herself in this case. What's the special Danish interest in?
Well, Vibeke Sperling was our correspondence journalist in Moscow and to cover East of Europe for 25 years. And we specialized in human rights. So, of course, she had an interest in the case, But since we see this yoga movement, which is based on Gregorian Bivolaru's teaching, is not just in Romania; it's actually international. It of course awakens international interest in all the European countries. And let's say her angle was the same. In the movie, you see an interview with her, and she investigated the case. She had exactly the same angle as those parliamentarians you see here. That there has not been a single evidence of the accusations and persecutions against Bivolaru, except the statement from Madalina Dumitru, which she dismissed, as Fautré will explain, after they released her from the arrest.
So we will. Willy Fautré is the director of Human Rights Without Frontiers, and he has followed this case the last years. And in May, April this year, if I remember correctly, at least in the spring this year, he was in Bucharest to finalize a report on the case. He was here last week. We kept a side event together on other aspects of this case, and afterwards he made a message for us now, a short interview.
So in May of this year, I carried out a fact-finding mission with one of my colleagues in Bucharest, meeting national human rights institutions, also members of the board of the Mircea school and yoga practitioners. And quite by chance, there was a session of the Court of Cassation, the Supreme Court in Bucharest at the time, dealing with the case of Bivolaru. When I closely analyzed the situation, the legal situation in Bivolaru, I must say I was very puzzled because at the beginning of that dramatic story that started in the year 2004, and we are now in 2013, he was accused of many bad things. There were lots of charges, and at the end, only one charge was kept against him. That was sexual relations with a minor of age at that time. But even that evidence is very, very light and controversial because that minor that had been interrogated by the police during a whole day for 13 hours without a lawyer, without the presence of her parents, when she went back home and talked about the situation with her fiancé, they decided together to go and see a lawyer and go back to the police station, what they did 12 hours later, so on the next morning, to withdraw the statement that had been obtained from her under constraint. So they did it, but the judiciary never took that withdrawal into consideration, and that's finally what's left in the file against Bivolaru. It's a statement that was withdrawn by a so-called victim that maintained a position in the last 9 years, despite all the media coverage against her, saying that she was the whore of Gregorian Bivolaru and other bad things like that. So I would rather believe her than believe the judiciary. And especially because at other stages of the legal proceedings, more precisely in 2010, 2011, Bivolaru had been cleared of all charges by a court in Sibiu and on appeal by the court of Alba Iulia. So I find that accusation that lacks a lot of substance, and I will be happy to see how the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg will deal with his case.
And Willy Fautré and Human Rights Without Frontiers continue to bring this case further. He's mentioning Madalina Dumitru, and we will see her shortly. It's very important to mention that this case doesn't only concern Bivolaru, the asylum case does, but in Romania there are thousands of people in his yoga school who have now been socially marginalized, stigmatized in society, and there is one tragic story after the other, people being shunned by their family, losing their jobs, being forced to medication. There's a lot of really terrible story, and the Madalina Dumitru case is a human rights case by itself. We will hear her a short, just 1 minute statement from her regarding this.
Am fost uluită că autoritățile nu au ținut cont de acea declarație oficială și m-au tărât fără voia mea în acest proces absurd care mi-a dat viața peste cap. Îmi este clar acum că procurorii, la ordinul serviciilor secrete, au dorit cu orice preț să mă transforme într-un instrument de inculpare pe nedrept a lui Gregorian Bivolaru. Nu le-a păsat că eram minoră, dimpotrivă, m-am nenorocit pe viață.
This is very short. Her story. She doesn't want to appear. She has had very bad experience with the media. Of course, we have in the back DVD where you can find the whole. This is a whole film of more than 1 hour, 2 hours, with her case. It's not the specific issue of our talk today. But our next speaker, Gabriel Andreescu, you have met her and you have also met other victims specifically about this case.
Yes. During my investigation, of course, I worked with a lot of victims too, and I had a long interview with her. I was so impressed. But as you said before, it is not the only case. There are also some dramatic cases. Unfortunately, there is not the place to speak about. But let's have at our background that the Bivolaru's case, a huge case about the Romanian democracy and the fate of thousands of people. You know a lot about the case from the other presentations. I want to explain why today the Bivolaru's political asylum is an important test for the European system for the protection of human rights. Now Bivolaru is under the jurisdiction of the Swedish state, which is facing a conflicting situation about legal norms. On one hand, the actual European arrest warrant, which is a matter of secondary legislation in the European Union, and also the international domestic instruments for the protection of human rights. The general idea is that human rights provisions have precedence over other source of law. And it is important that recently this principle was analyzed in a European case, NADA versus Switzerland, when Switzerland also faced 2 cases. It was a UN Security Council resolution on Taliban's movement, and on the other hand, the European Convention for Human Rights. And the European Convention was very clear: human rights prevail. It's the same with the actual situation. I hope that the Swedish authorities will take out the case in the best way. Let's remember that the basic idea of the Swedish Supreme Court about the case was published in 2005, and the main sentence of this decision is the following, I quote: "The risk that Gregorian Bivolaru will be exposed to the foreign countries to persecution, aiming to his life or liberty or else, is of serious character." What I am to explain later is this is valid today. Yes, the fear of persecution is confirmed by all the events after 2006 when he received the permanent residence permit in Sweden. I have a lot of reference to how institutions tackle the case in Romania. The main reference is, of course, the trial and how judges dealt with the case. You already know that initially there were two lower courts who decided that Bivolaru is not guilty, but finally the higher court decided to start again the trial, at the end of which the decision was that he deserves 6 years in prison. What is the problem of the trial? We have now those records, written elements of the trial of the defense lawyers, and they say, I quote, that this was a complete asymmetry between witnesses. Those are the prosecutions who respectfully heard, sometimes for hours, often oriented in the sense of declaring what was unfavorable to the defendant. Those of the defense so intimidated, harassed, threatened to be charged with perjury, faced ironical comments. The vast majority of questions asked by the defenders were rejected, even when they seemed essentially to the case. I stress there are proofs in the sense they all these objectives are related to specific behaviors, and I quote 1, 2, for example, Judge Ionuț Matei orders the lawyer, do not be impertinent because I will fine you, okay? Or is it that hard to concentrate to the 2-3 hours as much as the meeting lasts? So this fight was the behavior of the panel. But the most serious case, which reflected the disrespect to the accused of the idea of justice, what happened in the final. Before the last term, judges had to decide about Bivolaru's, he is guilty or it is not guilty. Before the final session, the president's panel ordered a press conference and said, I received a letter. Yes, he received a letter which was signed by Mircea and Bivolaru's devotees, and by which they warned him, threatened him to receive revenge if he is not gentle with Bivolaru. It is clear that this is a detrimental letter for the accused. It is clear that such a letter would create an angry attitude towards him. So the press was informed, the session started, so which is not normal in this kind of context. The president, Ionuț Matei, said, I'll be very tough with the case, and yes, he was very tough, finally decided 6 years in prison for Bivolaru. It's clear it is a fabricated case. It's so unacceptable that a judge of the higher court behave in this way, is involved in such a fabricated case. And we can prove that by the behavior of the government. What happened to the government? The government sent to the European Court for Human Rights, where are pending complaints from Bivolaru and other Mircea victims, saying, you know, our judge received this letter, you understand that you can't be confident in that one. The complaint they sent can be trusted, you have to draw them and don't take this case. But of course they had no proof that it was about the Bivolaru and Mircea devotees as authors of the case, of this letter. It was an allegation which was not at all acceptable for a government, but it behaved in this way. Okay, I can quote.
So this was a clear
Yes.
collaboration between media and the judge in this case to make a statement. This is
It is a collaboration between the judge, media, government, and different kind of institutions. This is a specificity of the case. All the entire system of Romanian institutions were involved in that because the case was so huge that you couldn't escape an information, something which come back against the authors of the publication case.
Yeah, and like was mentioned that the TV footage was it was police internal footage that was given to media immediately, and it's been seen again and again, these direct connections between prosecutor and media. And also I want to mention again that we brought up this in a working session the other day, and the Romanian delegation said, but you are then against the free speech of Romania, which we are of course not. It must just be done in a legal way, these things.
Okay, but I'm trying to
Yeah.
stress on that. I want to explain because one can say, okay, this is the freedom of the press is important, you have to let everything. I name this approach an American approach, which is legitimate, but in order to be a real American approach, it must be coherent, must be symmetrical. Let's see in this case what happened related to the behavior of the National Audiovisual Council, which has the competencies in Romania to deal with the different human rights, balancing the equilibrium between rights, the right to dignity or the rights to freedom of expression. Some days ago, 1 week, I think, the National Audiovisual Council received from Mircea, as association of the long list of yogis, a complaint against a journalist and the TV channel because how they incited people and institutions against Bivolaru and Mircea. And you see, we have a small clip, you'll see what the man said. And the National Audiovisual Council denied take any decision, saying, okay, this is the problem they spoke about Mircea and Bivolaru. That's okay. Let's see.
Fraților, rog justiția din România, rog presa de calitate, rog tabloizii, rog pe cine să poate sesiza, să intervină și să-i pună pe ăștia de la Mircea cu botul pe labe cât mai repede. A fost desfințată în România porcăria asta? Sau încă mai au drept să emită? Da, doar la Ceaușescu a fost desfințat. Nu știu, rog domnul prim-ministru, fac o rugăminte și la viitorul președinte al României. Noi nu putem să scăpăm de bandiții ăștia. Da? Da, indignații, ci că semnează nu Mircea. Noi haideți un pic cu șantajul și cu asta să se sesizeze cineva, nu știu, DNA-ul. Din câte îmi dau eu seama, totuși judecătorul n-a pus botul, adică Ionuț Matei l-a condamnat astăzi definitiv, că despre asta e vorba, la 6 ani de pârnaie cu executare pe domnul în contumacie, pe domnul Gabriel sau Gregorian, Gregorian, Bivolaru, și sper să nu ne lăsăm șantajați de acești nesimțiți, da, care până la urmă, iată, tot ei sunt cu gura mare. Cum să faci, bă, așa ceva? Dar e o sectă care trebuia scoasă în afara legii de mult. Dar oare n-ați avut curajul, ăștia 600 cât sunteți acolo de parlamentari, oare n-are nimeni curajul să vină și să-i pună pe ăștia cu botul pe la ce trăim în evul mediu, bă, sau ce e aici? Puneți noi, terminați-noi cine sunt ăștia, mă. E frică de ăștia de la misa? Sau care-i problema? Dați-i, domnule, să-i băgați pe toți la pușcărie. Și nu mai trebuie judecați, mă, îi luați după scrisoarea asta. Vreau și eu niște stenograme, să auzim, să ne distrăm un pic, că n-am vorbit niciodată despre ăștia. Da? S-au dus acolo toți ăia hipnotizații, deci că suntem în cartea junglei, că tot am vorbit de India. Da? Duceți-vă, bă, în India, atunci acolo, în jungla aia indiană. Sunt cică vreo 300 de feluri de junglă în India. Aia. Duceți-vă acolo, bă, vă luptați cu tigrii aia, vedeți? Păi a reușit să-i hipnotizați.
Yeah, what to say? I mean, this is the...
Okay, I say again, it is possible to say the free expression is so important that you have to accept this evil. But on the other hand, the same institution in 2011 in February analyzed a case, the case of a documentary about Mircea, displayed the national TV channel. It was the documentary name Those That Sing Differently. And it was an effort of the journalist to understand the truth and the lies about Mircea. It was a documentary. The result was that the National Audiovisual Council fined with the highest possible fine the TV channel because it presented to the audience this documentary, saying, okay, it was only one part idea, there are some blurred images, we have problems with this. You looked what the journalist did, invited authorities to arrest people without judgment and so on. And the tone, the attitude, it was an invitation to aggressivity. It is a blended difference between how the National Audiovisual Council dealt with 2011 case and this one, and it speaks about the blunted discrimination of Bivolaru and the Mircea group in Romania. As such, I can say, really, we have even today the same problem of fear prosecution for persecution for Bivolaru in Romania. That fear is very serious, and we have to take care. And the Swedish state has to do something. In my opinion, okay, it has to decide in favor of the human rights protection, and also is good Sweden will look what is happening through the European Court for Human Rights, which will judge in, I say, 2 or 3 years the complaints from Romania. Thank you.
Thank you. It's in the Supreme Court of Sweden, it was discussed explicitly the relationship between authorities and media and the campaign, the heads against Bivolaru and his followers by the Swedish Foreign Ministry. And their conclusions were a part of the decision not to extradite Mr. Bivolaru. We'll have a short comment from Mircea Cartarescu, who is a very famous today Romanian writer who was in the weekend in Gothenburg in a book fair to present his authorship, and he was speaking there openly about his experiences from Romanian media, and he thought it would fit very well to be presented here. So.
I was so badly handled by the media, which I would say that spotted me from all the directions possible and instigated the other intellectuals and the other people against me and some other intellectuals that I was really crushed down by them with all sorts of imaginary. It was a campaign. Mr. Norman Mana, who was also the subject of some campaigns in Romania, know how dirty can there be. There is nothing that they respect. They do not respect your private life. They do not respect your parents. They do not respect your wife. They cover everything with dirt. And if I think I could stand the torture, I cannot stand being dirtied each day and each hour. And this happens with the intellectuals in Romania today. All of them were muted by this continuous crusade, I'd say, against them in my country.
The muting of intellectuals and opposition in Romania today. We will soon go deeper into the specific asylum case and the judiciary aspects of this. Before that, if there are any questions regarding the specific situation in Romania, now could be a time for that. And as I want to mention that Gabriel Andreescu has written 2 books specifically on this case. They are in Romanian, but we have, as also Joachim mentioned, excerpts translated into English in the back of the hall. Then let us move further. I mean, the Romanian situation as such, it's been clarified from different angles, both the abusive behavior of authorities and the collaboration with media, making it an insecure place. For sure it has not changed. It's not only since the Ceausescu times, but also recent events like we heard last week, these examples. We will now hear the professor of European law, Lucia Rossi, from the University of Bologna, who has engaged herself in this case.
I think that in this case, what is very important is, first of all, protocol number 24, which is annexed to the Lisbon Treaty. This protocol says that in principle, all the states of the European Union are considered safe states. It means that asylum should not take place for the citizen of member states with regard to other member states. However, the same protocol provides for an exception. A member state can process the application of asylum if it deems so. In this case, it is important to consider letter D of this protocol. If a member state should so decide unilaterally in respect of the application of a nation of another member state, in that case the Council shall be immediately informed. The application shall be dealt with on the basis of the presumption that it is manifest and founded, without affecting in any way, whatever the cases may be, the decision-making power of the member state. It means that the member state is free to decide whether give or not asylum to the applicant. This was the first point. The second point is that in this case, everything happened before the accession of Romania to the European Union. So this person acquired a right of asylum. The asylum has been already given, recognized. So it is not this accession of Romania to the European Union cannot change the individual position of this subject. And finally, my third remark concerns the European arrest warrant decision, because we have recent decisions of the Court of Justice saying that Da Silva is this last judgment, this sense, saying that if a state can refuse to apply the European arrest warrant to a citizen of a national citizen, it should refuse the same condition to deliver the citizen of another member state, which is on his territory. In view of these 3 points, I would say that in this case Romania cannot ask to annul the asylum that had been already recognized. If Romania asks to annul this asylum, the protocol applies. It means the Council of Ministers of the European Union must be interested by the Swedish government, which I think is not convenient for Romania because it will transform an individual case in a political case. And if the member states of the European Union find that there is a violation, a systematic violation of freedom of religion or freedom of association or freedom of opinion, they could apply the procedure of Article 7, which is sanction against Romania. So I think that in this case it would not be wise for Romania itself, the Romanian government, to insist in this case, because otherwise the Swedish government could start the procedure provided for by the protocol.
And I want to mention in connection with this that the Romanian government is pushing this. And as was also mentioned in the right of reply of the Romanian delegation in the working session, they said that, well, we are a part of the good family, we are part of all the institutions, so why do you question us? And then again, we must remind that even the European Commission questioned the reforms and the lack of efficiency within the reforms, especially precisely in these areas that the Mircea case and the Bivolaru case reflect. The question of the independence on the judiciary, the possible corruption of those in power, and the collaboration, the partial work of the media. Again, let's remember that this case is really pointing to the weak point of European Union, because indeed, like she says, it's up to the individual state to put the human rights in front and say we will not follow the European work of arrest. On the other hand, if that happens and if that continues to happen, we must question, of course, the collaboration generally between the member states of the European Union. Also, it's very interesting when will an individual case become a political case, and that's exactly where we are now. This case has been an individual case where the refugee has enjoyed his asylum, the persecution has continued, Romania has had the possibility to deal with it at the national level, to stop the persecutions, to compensate the victims eventually, but now they are pushing this in such a way that it will turn into a political case. We will have some remarks also from Gregory Tuan, the human rights lawyer representing Bivolaru in Strasbourg on these issues.
I would like to stress the fact that since 2005, Romania sent 3 requests for extradition. 3 times Sweden refused and rejected the requests stemming from Romania because they deem that in case of return, Mr. Bivolaru would face unfair trial and political repression and political persecution. I think this is very strong arguments coming from the Swedish authorities. So I am quite confident into the attitude of the Swedish authorities. However, quite recently, the Romanian authorities sent another type of request, not an extradition request, but a European warrant of arrest, which is approximately the same thing. However, under the instruments of the EU law regarding the European warrant of arrest, Sweden is almost obliged to comply with the decision of Romania regarding the European warrant of arrest. However, there are some exceptions in favor of Sweden. And as I said, Sweden cannot extradite Mr. Bivolaru in application of a European warrant of arrest since he is still protected by his refugee status. So, for Sweden, the first step would be to withdraw the refugee status, the political refugee status of Mr. Bivolaru, which is almost impossible. We have here a clear problem of confrontation between international norms. That is to say, on the one hand, refugee norms and international law, international human rights and humanitarian law, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the law of the European Union. So I guess that now the Swedish authorities are very much embarrassed. They are in a bad position. However, I think that they will still comply with their own national law, and they will comply with the international human rights law. They cannot send Mr. Bivolaru, in my opinion, in my professional opinion, to Romania, since he is protected by his refugee status.
Again, very clear, there are these two principles, these two different sets of laws that are now balancing between each other, and will be in the end the Swedish decision, and the consequences will come from that. It is, like he also points out, it's a special situation for Sweden, because Sweden was also one of the countries in 2007 pushing for involvement of Bulgaria and Romania to let them be part of the European Union. And only months before Romania was officially part of the European Union, they gave the asylum to Mr. Bivolaru. It was within the same months. We will move to the testimonies of Mr. Mihai Stoian, who has been deeply involved in this. He is here representing Bivolaru and has been the student of Bivolaru and has experiences within the Mircea movement, both as a teacher but also as being targeted of the persecutions there, and especially following this process very closely since the negotiations in the Supreme Court 2005. So please.
Thank you. So obviously all these presented here are facing us now with an important dilemma, and I would say in the same time with a great choice that lays ahead us. Yet this choice is not visible if we don't consider the human dimension of this case. And the human dimensions was cached and was put forward in these testimonies, but as a direct participant to this, as a student of Mr. Bivolaru, as a yoga teacher, as an educated scientist, I can tell that the human dimension of this case is unguessed by most of the people, and constitutes in a way the reason why it is such an important dilemma. I will aim to put it from the perspective of this forum to make it in a way more visible. First, one important reminder: institutional construction have to serve the citizen and not the other way around. Now, of course, the dilemma is, are we choosing to protect the individual or to protect the institution for the sake of the dream that lays behind it? Now, this asylum case of Mr. Bivolaru, beside the technicalities that the lawyers are putting forward, is raising the dilemma into the public domain now. And of course, some are saying, well, it goes into the political domain. I would have a stop into the public domain first, which is the purpose of this meeting, as far as I understood. Mr. Bivolaru was a victim of the communist system in Romania, as officially admitted even by the modern time authorities, so to speak, in 2011. But he was also a victim of judiciary errors, to call the list what happened with him in the EU member state Romania. He is enjoying, as you see, asylum in Sweden, and this is represented in a way a ray of hope for the citizens of the European family. This also is somehow a case that is giving the possibility to normality, to a normal transition from deeply totalitarian regime, which was engulfing Romania for so many years, to a real democracy. And we all know, and we have been there, all the people in Europe, that a date like December 1989 cannot define a transformation, a deep transformation in society. Maybe it defines the beginning of a deep transformation, as well as our maturity doesn't start when our ID card is released by the authorities as individuals. Now, cancelling this fundamental right, in our opinion, to put things in perspective, represents not only a very bad message to the citizens of Europe, but it shows that things are going backward. We built something, but we built it from the top down, which is not really possible. Now, if a person, as Mr. Bivolaru, has been actively serving the public, he's an author of over 40 books, over 200 articles, conferences, public conferences. He's the author of the most comprehensive yoga system of study that exists today on this planet, and I speak this as doing research over 15 years in this domain. If a person like that cannot be protected against abuses, judicial errors, or persecutions, now of course the whole construction that we put on top of this become doubtful. So we should be very careful what we bury in the rubble of this European construction. Gregorian Bivolaru was sentenced in June this year after a bizarre trial with, in my opinion, Kafkian accents, a trial that lasted for over 10 years. Now, during time, accusations where you see police was working hand in hand with the media. The police worker is filming, and 3 hours later is broadcast on the media, even the rough cut from the police. And if you don't call that cooperation, I don't know anyone who cooperates tighter than this, in a state where institutions should be independent, at least on the paper. They don't care to show independency, even on the paper. So, during this time, accusations were building up with unprecedented seriousness. Now, drug dealing appeared very often, human trafficking, weapon dealing, and it went all the way to accusations of human sacrifices. Now, of course, if we talk about the Aztec Empire, we might, or the reminiscence of those people, we might have a history, but in Romania of 2000, it's a little bit bizarre. All these vanished in time one by one, as also pointed by the fact-finding mission of Mr. Willy Fautré. Nothing remained, and all they were proven as media stunts. And this term is not labeled by me, it was labeled by other researchers in the domain. They were media stunts done by an authority that still cannot make the difference between rights and responsibility when it comes to exerting power, as Romanian authorities obviously need to learn. In the end, the Romanian state forced a sentence upon Mr. Bivolaru with the price of destroying the life of the one they hypocritically and noisily claim to defend. You have here the entire story. This DVD is a rough cut of an interview with the victim, the alleged victim of Mr. Bivolaru, who for 10 years is screaming for justice for her own case, because in reality she's the victim of the authorities. And she's claiming that, she's demonstrating that, the lawyers demonstrate that, and yet we have only one person sentenced there, and this is Mr. Bivolaru. This is the reason why I said that the sentence was forced upon him. With such a sentence given, Romania is not affecting only one person, but all those who are studying with Mr. Bivolaru, who were trying to defend him, who were practicing yoga under his coordination. Challenging the protection of Mr. Bivolaru within the European Union, challenging the asylum, is practically throwing hundreds of thousands of people onto a very dangerous path of harassment in front of the media and in front of the society. And I'm not talking here about a potential danger, it's demonstrated while we're talking. I'm coming now from Denmark, and in Denmark, the yoga school who had been founded by a student of Mr. Bivolaru in 1990 is facing exactly the same process of mediabolization as in Romania, of course, with keeping the proportions of a far more democratic system, but still exactly the same patterns, proving, I can tell as a scientist, proving that is within the system where the error is, since everywhere different understandings and different cultures present the same patterns of reaction. So what is happening by challenging this asylum is that same things are copied, identical then from a media to another media. We just faced a media campaign in Denmark that was presenting copy-paste from the Romanian media, same accusations with no discernment. It's true, later on they apologized, some of them, but what is the damage to be measured after you've been throwing the arrow? This part was already proven, and now we're facing extension of the labeling of the yoga practitioners, and therefore the human rights dimension of the case is extending while we're speaking. There are currently 21 yoga teachers that are facing charges of human trafficking in another file that was quickly built up by the Romanian authorities in their desperate effort to cover their tracks of the first file where they already have been proven so wrong. Now, in yogic terms, this voluntary work is called karma yoga. It's a well-known practice worldwide. Romania is now prosecuting 21 yoga teachers for practicing a millenary yoga system. Now, of course, with a sentence forced upon him, with an arrest warrant that is challenging the asylum status given by Sweden in 2007 for exactly the same file, Gregorian Bivolaru is not allowed to travel. He is not able to join any public meetings, such as this one, to speak for himself, to meet his students worldwide, or to come back to his native country. He has to flee, he left everything there and search for justice. Now he's living as a fugitive. He received threats in his official address. The Swedish police is having under investigation a lot of threat letters, a lot of accusations. His car was attacked by unknown people. Now, in all this time, the institutions that were supposed to help in this, they're serving as a tool in the hands of groups of interest that were shown partially in these exposures here. As a principle, the asylum institution is to be carefully protected, since it is the last hope one have in this always unbalanced confrontation between the individual and the state. It's somehow the last frontier. Now, generally, we see today what we say it is an alarming rise of a certain type of rhetoric from the side of the state. And I'm referring here to the fact that in many cases today, we hear the request that the citizens should blindly trust the state. Meanwhile, or the institutions, to put it more accurate. Meanwhile, the institutions of the state tend to drastically reduce the feedback system. Of course, these feedback systems are the fail-safe mechanism that are protecting the citizen. So practically, we are told to trust the institution while the institution discreetly removing most of the feedback system. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the time of accepted casualties is on the paper obsolete. We cannot go for that anymore, at least in theory. There is no measure in human lives anymore. We cannot say if it is less than 100 victims, we can accept this kind of casualties for a greater dream. That is an obsolete theory, in theory. Because in practice, I dare to say that even at the European level, and I've been involved in different forums since 2005, we see what I call the model of institutionalized perfection. Certain rights and liberties cannot be by definition broken by the state. So they say, all states, as was also stated today, all states in European Union are, in theory, safe states. They cannot be wrong in or do wrongdoings against their citizens. But the case of the yoga teacher Gregorian Bivolaru is exactly proving that eliminating the fail-safe mechanisms in modern Europe is premature. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but it's premature. We leave the kids playing with dangerous buttons. They're not yet mature enough. The Swedish Supreme Court was granting Mr. Bivolaru asylum in 2007 for reasons that were exposed here. Now, a multi-level judiciary system is in force in all the countries in Europe. And the multi-level judiciary system has the purpose to protect the citizen against errors. If you are not happy with the decision of the court, you can go to a higher court, you have a second chance, or even a third chance. Now, this was the very foundation of such a system. It was in view the citizen and not the state. In Romania, in the communist Romania, we still have such formality. Of course, the state was always right there. It was a perfect institution, by the way. But today, you can challenge the decisions. Now, in the case of Mr. Bivolaru, the state was proving going backward. The first court acquitted him, the second court confirmed and stand firm that he is not guilty, and suddenly the Supreme Court is denying all the decisions and take a decision upside down in a trial that I dare to say it was breaking all possible judiciary terms, except breaking blatantly the law. Maybe they did it, but I'm not expert in that, so I don't want to. I know only one thing about the last phase of the court in Romania in this recent case. One of the judges, of the 3 judges in the Supreme Court, was unlawfully appointed. But if that is acceptable, then of course we are talking about the extremely tribal kind of system. So of course the course of actions in this case is theoretically within the frame of the law, but it shows the fact that Mr. Bivolaru's case, it is indeed, as Mr. Andreescu put it, a test of the democratic institutions of European Union. And the human rights dimension, the message that is given to the citizens, risk to be extremely negative. For, as I was showing here, if we throw hundreds of thousands of people just in front of the unleashed media, who is hungry for sensationalism, then of course I'm wondering what's the point in building all these institutions in the first hand, if not for us, for all of us, where everyone will find a certain place. So the call that our yoga school and also the call that Mr. Bivolaru is making to all the responsible forums of Europe today is to seriously, maturely consider the facts, to consider from a broad perspective all the implications of this case and not to dismiss superficially based on political interests and some short-sighted goals that will prove to be catastrophic in a long run, and theoretically everybody goes into this journey of constructing the Europe for a quite long run. That was the point.
Thank you very much. And as was also mentioned by Lucia Rossi there, that this is one of the consequences of the Lisbon Treaty, and it was much discussed at that time. What will happen when we have such a situation like this? And now we have it, and then it's important to face it face to face and not to try to cover it under the carpet. And that's one of the reasons why we want to raise this question here for civil society to know. And of course, we have also had discussion with the Swedish delegation, the Romanian delegation, and we had hoped they would be here. At least they follow the case. We will open the floor now for questions, remarks, and discussions regarding this for some 10 minutes before we come to the final conclusions or concluding statements for now. So please be free to put any questions to the panelists or whatever comments you may have on this issue.
Thomas Leske from IAG, which is a student NGO doing intercultural exchange. I was not very familiar with the case before, and maybe this is a question that most of you are aware of, but my obvious interest would be what is the interest of the Romanian government or state to pursue this case in the way they do?
Well, unfortunately, they are not here to answer your question. That it's not the first time it's been asked. There have also been direct urges from experts, like for example the Swedish sect expert Nylund, for the Romanians to drop this case, to let go of it, because it's not going in the right direction for anyone, also not for Romania. I wonder if anyone in the panel would like to maybe share some view that might give a perspective on the question, even if not answering from the Romanian government. Yes, please.
I tried to respond to this question since 1996. And till 2009, where I started to work with the last documents, I couldn't understand, really. And I was close to the phenomenon. I did report studies. Yesterday I wrote a 400 pages book, which is the answer. This means that the answer is not simple. But we can say today the following. What happened today was in connection with what happened before 1989, with the fact that former Securitate officers repressed the Yoga movement, and particularly Bivolaru, sent him to prison and the psychiatric hospital. And all these people remained in the office, and they became members of the Romanian Intelligence Service. They preserved that status of people with something on their shoulders who have to explain why they behave so. This was the basis. And after that, there were random situations which transformed Bivolaru's case a topic for the media scandal. And because of that, different institutions, Ministry of the Interior, the Parliament, and so on, were involved in. And so the process developed. And the Romanian Intelligence Service took it seriously, was involved officially in the case in 1996. They are the first documents that it was clear they followed the case since 1990. And because the case became so big and all the institutions were under the pressure, they tried to destroy the movement. And this started to, such a scenario, I think, was clarified in 2001, 2002, and the scenario reached that extraordinary paramilitary action against some young people, nice women, nice boys, who preach always non-violence. They didn't use drugs, and they accused that they use weapons, drugs. They are the authors of person trafficking and so on. All these crazy accusations, and the action in 2004 involved about 300 gendarmes, it was already said, but a lot of institutions, the Romanian Intelligence Service, the public prosecutors, the police, and the media, which the mobilization of the media was the must of the case, because, you know, the media was always controlled, but there were different groups, media fighting for a political political party, others fighting for the other ones, but that time they joined together to slander, to use angry and absurd accusation against the Mircea group. So the entire nation jumped on Mircea to destroy them, mobilized by the institution. But they didn't succeed. This is, yes, it was an interesting situation. They didn't succeed. It was not, in fact, only the big action in March, but it was a second one in April 1st, when also it was massive use of military force. Of course, people start to complain, send petitions to different institutions, or start also to the European level. So the authorities had something very difficult to deal with. And finally, the idea was, okay, you have to prove that they are guilty. And so they started the Bivolaru trial as a special case. He was the spiritual leader. And also some people who have a certain important position in the yoga school, accusing them of human trafficking, in a way which is so light, if I use a polite way of speaking, which is so stupid in fact, because finally they want to say, okay, you use those people because you put them to do volunteer work, and in fact you had in your mind to exploit them with this volunteer work. But if volunteer work is everyone, if we look what is happening in the Romanian monasteries, there's thousands of people. This is something we can raise a problem. And now, the Romanian institutions try to save their face, try to convince that they got something, a small pearl. Okay, one pearl was that sexual relations with a minor, but in fact the minor was at that time 16 years. She had the right to have sexual relations with someone more 18 years. So because of that, they interpreted that Bivolaru is in fact a teacher, and as a teacher you have not the right to do, but in the law the teacher is a teacher, is not a master. So they abuse every piece of legislation would suggest something, saying they are right and they are wrong. Now we face this 21 accusation, people accused the trial. We have to follow what is happening there. But
my answer is the following. You have something, you can see something which started before 89, something which proves the continuity of institutions, of people, and mentality, which became an institutional mentality. A lot of people with power were involved and are responsible, and the institutions try now to save their face. And they do what they do. The explanation is not simple because it involves a lot of things. I can cover everything. But if you read these books, you have the perfect answer. Thank you.
I'd like to say something. Lorena Feruța from the Permanent Mission of Romania. I was also in the plenary hall. I would like to highlight, I think for the third time, that in our opinion, the process, the trial of Mr. Bivolaru has nothing to do with the communist regime and with Ceausescu persecutions, so it's something totally different. The trial expressed very clear, the sentences expressed very clear that Mr. Bivolaru had relationships with a minor, and he had been committed to 6 years of prison, as you know. And concerning what you say before, that in the first and the second process he was declared innocent, I think that everywhere in movies or in real life we have this procedure. So they are the rules of the game. You know, you can try several times, and the Supreme Court has the last word. So if the Supreme Court said that he is guilty, you cannot take into the consideration the others' trials and what happened before. So it's, after me, it's very clear. We have a sentence, and it's, I cannot say that they are influenced in Romania in this case from the juridic aspects. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here and for coming with this contribution. And we are aware, as you have mentioned also in the working sessions, that there is a sentence, a conviction from the Romanian Supreme Court. We of course stress that exactly that is the problem. Because if you put it next to the decision of the Swedish Supreme Court, you find that within Europe, within the European Union, we have a problem where two Supreme Courts come to two very different conclusions regarding this case. And furthermore, we have different experts on human rights and law that are leaning towards giving the Swedish decision their support and continuously criticizing the Romanian support, also the case. And it's not the time now when we have went through the critique of the trial as such, but one of the things, of course, is that Mr. Bivolaru was never heard because the judge of the Romanian Supreme Court didn't want to wait for the Swedish authorities to make the rogatory commission under fair conditions in Sweden. So there have been again and again critique of the Romanian decision, but never of the Swedish decision, and that's why we raise this. What is happening in a Europe where two Supreme Courts take two very different decisions? But thank you very much for your comment, and I'm sorry that I didn't see.
Sorry, I forgot to say something about the Mircea representatives of Mircea. It's acknowledge movement in Romania, and it's up to every adult to take part to something which is legal. So far I know they have no problem to exercise their thoughts and everything they want to do in Romania. So I like to separate a little bit the case from Mr. Bivolaru with Mircea aspects, because they are free, the members are free to exercise their liberties.
Thank you. And this is of course correct from a formal perspective, but on the other hand we have again and again the documentation of the stigmatizations of those who are members of this group. Joachim, you wanted to come with a comment?
Just shortly a comment on your explanation about how the judicial system as we see it in real life and in movies is following these 3 trials. But in this case we don't have any victim, which is unusual, not even in movies. Usually in movies you have a victim at least, which is harassed in some way, but here you don't have a victim. And it's interesting that there hasn't been any single private person who has persecuted either Mircea or Gregorian Bivolaru for anything. It has all the time only been the Romanian state, the Romanian prosecutors. Even in this case, they say that she was violated, she says he was not. And I think this is a big question mark in my research, at least. You cannot have a trial and convictions of a person when you don't have a person who is a victim. It's logic.
Thank you, and let's go to the concluding remarks from the panel.
I want to have a feedback to you, and after that, 2 words, final words, as you say. You know, we can discuss the trial here, of course. We have not the data and the competencies. But you know, this trial was a test for the Romanian democracy, and it failed. I'm sorry, it failed. What to do if a democracy has failures? Everyone has. We need to do something together to repair the system. You know, we are now after 23 years after the revolution, 5 years after the moment we became a European Union state. And even today, people, devoted people for human rights, minority rights, etc., when deal on complain about what happens, in some cases, of course not all the time, in Romania, human rights abuses, Romanian authorities, Romanian delegations say that's wrong, you are not correct. In fact, in such a situation, we have to discuss and say, okay, we must find the truth and to do something with the truth. This is the mentality of the communist regime, where all the institutions had to serve and secure the image of the former communist country. And this is a failure of us, because we can't discuss the people who works at the level of civil society, scholars who represent the knowledge of the cases, and institutions which are politically controlled, of course.
More or less. Ministry of Foreign Affairs is not politically controlled. Sorry.
Okay, if you want to preserve this level of discussion, I have to accept this. But this was a friendly message. I think that I was not understood as such. It was a friendly message that it's better to think together for the good and not to fight to save the image. An image can be saved without saving the reality. Okay, but as I said, I think the Romanian democracy in the Belarus case failed, but I hope that the Swedish state and the European system for human rights will work in future successfully. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, first, I think the intervention from Romania is very good as an example of arrogance of power, and the fact that the old mentality, forgetting who pays you, your salary, is kind of symptomatic here. Of course, we still are away. We have to go quite a long way to realize that the institution has to serve the people. And if so many thousands of people say, hey, this is wrong what you're doing with us, not with others, but with us, then of course something has to be done. You saw an excerpt of that media program. My colleagues were counting since 1990 over 12,500 media broadcasts, not so acid like that one, but the quantity beats every other subject in Romania after 1989 by far. Now maybe today we have all kind of very popular subjects also rising, also due to the misunderstanding of institutions who they serve in reality. And in a way, probably because people as such don't have an identity yet in front of the state has a very strong brand in front of the people. So for this reason, I cannot disagree more with the fact that the legal frame is the only frame in which the social life is taking place. Yes, Mircea don't have legally some problems, but we do have a lot of problems to exist, and I'm speaking on the behalf of many thousands, tens of thousands of practitioners who are losing jobs, stigmatized by the society, and marginalized concretely. We have over 600 cases documented of people whose life was severely affected, and when I say severely, we say losing jobs, family problems of severe cases. Even we have Mr. Andreescu who is investigating a case of forced medication in psychiatric hospital by a person who didn't want to quit the yoga practice. These are results of an incompetent state, first of all, who doesn't know how to listen those who the state was supposed to serve. Because it's not, the state cannot say citizens are crazy, or at least this part of the citizens are crazy. You are there to deal with everyone's problems. That's why you are paid, as far as we understood from this wonderful dream that we call democracy. So for this reason, an argument such as, look, we did our job, we make a law, you are falling between the lines there, it's your problem. It is an argument that, in my view, is giving this arrogance of power. You get the power, you don't care how the others are hurt by it or whatever. You just make sure that you have a legal paper signed by someone to conclude your actions, and for this reason you're safe. In my opinion, that's far from being enough. And time again, the evidences are showing that practitioners of yoga in Mircea in Romania, they are suffering persecution by this hand-in-hand work from the state with the media and all these institutions. I'm not saying that people in the institutions are thinking in the same way, but the fact is the result hurts, and that should be the concern of the people in that institution, not how they look from outside.
Thank you for these concluding remarks from the panel, and of course we are interested in a friendly debate. It's very important though that we keep the debate to the core issues, the reality that people experience and the human rights abuses that are ongoing. that's also the core of the message you want to give now, because everyone agrees on the paper that the human rights have priority to any political directives. So now let's make sure that that happens. Now we stand in the dilemma that was foreseen when the Lisbon Treaty was constructed. Now we stand at the test, as is called by Andreescu and others, of the European democracy in reality. Will we sacrifice the human rights to have a image that seems to be correct, or do we dare to look deep into the issues and actually solve them where they are experienced by the people in Europe today? I thank very much the panelists and also the participants, and especially the Romanian delegation, for being with us today. And we will continue to cover this case. There is information in the back of the room, and please keep contact with us and bring this case wherever you can to the level that it needs. Thank you.